The Wild Planet column started in sounds. It was like punk mixed with industrial and just creative, really. Through that, I remember writing to some of the bands and got to know Ed Caspell from the legendary Pink.
There was a music paper called Sounds, and they used to have an article called Wild Planet. And I think that's what first introduced me to a lot of other music. Basically, in the Wild Planet section, they said, this music is disgusting, it's vile, it's depraved, blah, blah. I thought, I want some of that.
This is cassette culture.
By the start of the 1980s, original music recorded for underground cassette releases was already a growing wave. While the music business was largely ignoring the cassette scene, journalist Mick Sinclair was covering some of the 100 cassettes he'd receive each month in a column called Cassette Pets in the UK music paper Sounds. But by 1983, something has changed. The electronic music revolution is underway. The vision of the artists has become broader. The music has become weirder. A soon-to-be influential new column was devised to cover that new wave of music. Wild Planet, written and curated by Dave Henderson.
So I went and started interviewing bands, and then I did a little piece in there about cassette culture. Then I ended up on Sounds, and there was just more of this kind of music coming from all over the world by then. So I persuaded the editor that we should write something about it. And because there was so much of it, he said, why don't you do it in 2 parts? And then I designed it to look like some kind of fold-out book within the actual copy of Sounds. And, you know, I was inundated with tapes from people after that. So then it became a column every other week.
I was interested in that conversation how you pitched the idea, because Sounds was quite a sort of diverse paper in my memory.
Yeah, there was a lot of fighting in the office. So you had a faction of people who were the old heavy metal guys, and the editor, Jeff Barton, was a heavy metal guy. And Gary Bushell was there, and he was into punk and oi and all that kind of stuff. And then you had, on our table, you had me, Sandy Robertson, who was, you know, this Scottish guy who'd done a magazine called White Stuff based on Patti Smith. He was into William Burroughs and Throbbing Gristle and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other side, I had Edwin Pouncey, who's Savage Pencil, the illustrator. And he was, you know, he was always great for saying, oh, you should listen to this, you should listen to that. So anything from reggae to early REM to whatever, he was always very enthusiastic. And then I was kind of in the middle saying, well, what about these guys? And I remember famously, they said, oh, the magazine isn't pop enough. And they took us all individually to a restaurant for lunch to say, hey, what's the most pop thing you can write about? And I think I said, well, 23 Skidoo are quite commercial, aren't they? But anyway, yeah, so it was a broad church, so they let you do what you want, really. If you were really enthusiastic about something, they would let you go with it. There were people who were recording in their bedrooms, and not used to any kind of exposure at all. So it was quite interesting. There's some really interesting people. And there was also people like Graham from SBK, who lived in a squat in Kennington with Brian from Lustmord was on another floor. And they were, just because they had fantastic theories and stories, and Graham was into J.G. Ballard, and I got him to write a piece about J.G. Ballard for Sounds because, it just seemed like the thing to do. And he would introduce loads of people, like Dept Doris came over, and various other people. He said, you've got to hear these guys. And it was a great time because we were in the centre of London, so it was quite easy for people to come in. So, you get a call up to the floor where the editorial team was. There's these guys from Yugoslavia here called Lieback. They're all in uniforms. So, you go and have a chat with them, and they were, everybody was very much, thanks for giving us some exposure, because, there wasn't anywhere else that anyone was going to write about it at the time, apart from fanzines, of course.
The UK Electronica Festival was organised by Jeanette and Dennis Emsley of the Inkeys audio magazine, joining forces with Andy G of Lotus Records. With a huge lineup from the electronic fan community featuring stalls and synth demos, plus performances from ex-Throbbing Gristle members Chris Cozy, Hawkwind, German synth performer Robert Schroeder, and many others. Catching the mood of the moment, this event became an unlikely meeting point for a number of artists whose careers were about to take off. One of those was Martin Bowes from Attrition.
There was a festival called UK Electronica in 1983, and it was in Milton Keynes. So we went down and we got the train, and Chris and Cozy were on, so I got to meet them, and then Ed from the Pink Dots was there, he wasn't playing, and Gary from Third Mind was there. So that was the first time I'd met both of them. It was a good festival. So we got to, once you've met them, it's a bit better when you've met someone in person. And so then we ended up moving down to London from Coventry not long after and shared a house with them.
We went to Milton Keynes when I first started writing about it. There was a electronic symposium with lectures, and Robert Schroeder was playing a set. I remember going on the train, and then we met all these people, but all these guys had fanzines and cassettes like Nocturnal Emissions, Attrition, Portion Control. They were all there, and I met a lot of those people. And as I say, they had fanzines, and within them there were people like Esplendid, Geometrico, DDAA. I think SBK played in Brixton somewhere, and everybody went to that. So it became a bit of a social thing. And because Sounds at the time was in Covent Garden in the centre of town, people would come in. And so you saw quite a lot of people. The guy from Konstruktivits was a mate of Gary Levermore's, and he came down to London. He lived in Sheffield, and he was mates with like DVA and all that kind of stuff. And just, one thing led to another. People had already built up a network of acts, because Bourbonnais Quark lived in a squat in a fire station in New Cross Road in South London, because they would tour around Europe. They'd have people from Europe coming over to play there. It was all kind of word of mouth in those days. kind of all met the guys from Throbbing Gristle through a guy called Dan Landin, who's called Stan Bingo on the Throbbing Gristle things. Well, he was the person that made all the copies of 24 Hours of Throbbing Gristle, the tape things. And he copied them all in real time. He said, yeah, just listen to the whole set, 24 hours. That was the kind of attention to detail you had to have in those days. You know, he would introduce us to various things. I was really into Cabaret Voltaire, and he knew Cabaret Voltaire. This was long before I interviewed them. And he phoned them up. This is what you used to do in the day. And said, oh, I've got these tapes that you gave me. Can I make some copies for Dave? Because he's really a fan. And they were like, oh, yeah. So it was that kind of thing. It was very personal.
We'll die like this.
I remember meeting Richard Kirk in the street one day. He was in full leather trousers, leather jacket. I remember he insisted to me as well, when they brought out that Live at the Lyceum cassette, he says, this will be the only version of this, because I recorded it on stage. I said, there were loads of people in the audience recording it, no, but this will be the only version, he said.
Once you've got the Wild Planet column kind of on board with Sounds and you're publishing that, what kind of effect did that have? I mean, did you suddenly have a influx of cassettes through the mail?
Yeah, I had loads of stuff, and I literally would take cardboard box home at the end of the week full of loads of different things, beautifully packaged things, bizarrely Dadaist kind of things, and yeah, I just loved all of that. It was great, you know. And over the years, I've still got some things, but I've lost most of it, or else people have taken it or borrowed it or whatever. But yeah, it was a great thing, because I mean, even now, getting a record through the post is quite exciting, especially in these days where everything's a digital file.
Did you ever get anything in like a packaging extreme?
I did. I'll tell you a little story. Yeah, I got the opportunity to run a label, and I did a double album called the Elephant Table album with Steve Stapleton did a track and Portion Control. There's a lot of tracks, about 30 tracks on it. And it went really well. And it was kind of a spin-off from Wild Planet. And then after that, I thought, oh, I'll do another one. So I did 3-minute symphonies, which was tracks by Conrad Schnitzler, did a track, and various other people. So that was another double album. And I asked a band called Metamorphosis, who were from Nottingham. I asked them to do a 3-minute symphony. And they sent me a turd in a box. So that, you know, if you write a bad review of someone, it could have been them or it could have been somebody else.
That's shocking. That's absolutely shocking.
Well, you know, you get threatened as well in those days, because the Sounds used to sell, you know, 120, 130,000 copies a week. Mm. And if you wrote a bad review, you know, people would come and duff you up or try to. I tried to be very supportive of anybody who's put a lot of effort in, but it was a time when you could write reviews and say, this is rubbish, this is not very good, this album sounds like the previous. You know, that's the business that Sounds and Enemy were in at the time. I remember from the Bollocks Brothers, I must have written a bad review of him, and he somehow got my home number and really pestered me. Then he came in the office. He didn't do anything, but, you know. being on Sounds is quite a luxury because they would say, "Oh, I said, why don't we go to Coventry?" That's where I went and met Martin, and they wrote a feature which they called "Sent from Coventry," and I just went up and interviewed 4 bands. So yeah, it was a good time to be a journalist. Anyway, I did interview Cabaret Voltaire probably 20 times, I think.
Yeah, right. Were they willing interviewees?
Oh, they were fantastic. They were such nice people. Because in those days, Chris Watson was in the band, and when I first met them, and about 3 weeks after I'd been up to Sheffield and done the first interview, and I'd never written a feature before, so I was very diligent about the whole thing and worried about it. And then they were playing at North London Poly, and I saw Chris and I said, "Oh, God, come on, meet the guys." And they were thanking me for writing about them, and they're very humble people. Lovely. I remember Richard in Western Works. They had a very early video screen. They were showing various bits, and he had a copy of Clockwork Orange, which was banned at the time. And he said, "Oh, that's amazing." And he sent me a copy. He made a bootleg of it and sent me a copy. They were that nice, lovely people.
Yeah, and if I recall that you were also writing about like video releases in Wild Planet on occasion.
Yeah.
Was that like a thing that emerged in that period?
Yeah, there was, the Cabaret Voltaire had their own label. I can't remember what it's called.
Double Vision.
Yeah, which Paul Smith ran. And when I was in Western Works, they were showing me that film of the Iranian doing the self-flagellation thing. And I remember Chris Watson saying, "We need more reportage in what we do."
Yeah.
Yeah, so, the video thing was just starting, and people realised that you could make videos quite easily, but they were all very blurry, I remember. Because they were producing them themselves, so they were doing several copies. It was a copy of a copy.
Yeah, but it's like artists kind of transitioning from being bedroom sound artists to encompassing the visual aspect as well.
And I think the art side was huge, because I remember SBK did once they signed to whoever they signed to, I can't remember. They did a tour of the UK, and the first date was in Brixton, and they got Steve Stapleton, Nurse of a Wound, to support them. I remember Steve used to live around the corner from me in Archway at that time. Anyway, so he went to do this gig, and he basically put some music on and then we started throwing paint on a canvas on stage. And that was probably the only date he did on tour. He just couldn't cope with it, He just didn't know.
Right.
He's not a live performer, I remember Wire did it years before. They played at the Janetta Cochrane Theatre in London, and they basically didn't open the doors. So there's a massive queue, and they filmed the queue getting more agitated. And then they played the film once the people got in. I thought, that's performance art. That's brilliant.
Yeah. It all sort of sounds like a really kind of energized environment, doesn't it? With people sort of trying all these different things and being a bit provocative with their audiences and so on.
And to be honest, it was the punk scene in the late 70s. You could go and see lots of those kind of bands for 50p or whatever it was. It was like, it was next to nothing. And from that freedom, you got bands who were just going a bit further and, taking it that. I remember the first time I saw the Human League at the Music Machine, people were throwing pints of beer at them because, they weren't playing guitars for one thing.
Right.
But luckily they had some kind of scaffolding covering their synths.
Going back into that Wild Planet era, have you got any landmark releases or landmark moments when things kind of really moved forward?
I think when SPK got signed and people started paying attention to them, and then probably slightly before that, Throbbing Gristle did a show at the Lyceum where a lot of those people were there, and it was a really weird night. I think Fetish might have put it on. because we went and there were loads of religious people outside with vans broadcasting saying you're going to listen to the devil's music. We were all going, oh yeah, great. And then inside, Throbbing Gristle played first, just to annoy everybody. And they did one song, Discipline. Genesis just banged a teacher on his head for the rhythm. It was great. And then we had Zev, just with loads of chains on the stage, and Boyd Rice, who'd mic'd up the stage and was just hitting it. And Cabaret Voltaire played at the end. And it was just like, we've arrived, it's over.
What a bill. Yeah.
And I think at that moment, you kind of thought, well, lots of people are going to be copying this because it's suddenly a thing. So that was exciting. And, I think I remember seeing Test Department, who we knew quite well. I can't remember how we knew. I think I knew him through Steve Pike, the photographer. But anyway, they played at a station, Baker Street Tube Station. So they took over the station and were playing the station, which is great. And you thought, it's art, it's music, it's an experience. So things like that, and there was another live one they did underneath the arches, or railway arches somewhere in Waterloo, where they had American propaganda coming out of one side of as you walked in and Russian coming out of the other. So it was a company. And that was like, God, this is mad. This is, and it got by the police as well, so it's even better. And of course, when Neubauten played at the ICA with the road drills and they broke up the stage and the people from the ICA, because that's an art gallery, were like, oh! So,
yeah, right.
Where the culmination of that scene, breaking into the news. Those things were in the newspapers because people were shocked.
On the 3rd of January 1984, members of Berlin experimental group Einstürzende Neubauten were joined on stage at the ICA in London by Genesis P-Orridge and Fad Gadget. Wielding jackhammers and chainsaws, their conceptual goal was to dig down through the ICA stage to the subterranean tunnels they believed were underneath. They didn't succeed, but the event has become the stuff of legend.
You heard the voices of Martin Bose from Attrition, Rob Maycock from Mindscan Tapes, and Dave Henderson. Music was by 23 Skidoo live at the Hacienda, SPK Despair from the Elephant Table LP on Extract 1983, Hawkwind Phone Home Elliot live at the UK Electronica Festival, Attrition, Dream Sleep and Konstruktivits Andropov 84 from the Elephant Table LP, Cabaret Voltaire, Voice of America live on Granada TV, Seconds Too Late live 1980 in San Francisco, Einstürzende Neubauten live at the ICA 84.